Hey there, hope all is well. Here's another really good clip from the tape from the 1988 Iditarod, but it's really just a brief overview of Iditarod history. And I've got about 4 or 5 tapes now from old Iditarod footage. And it's really interesting. I didn't know poodles ran the Iditarod, that these two people jumped on bikes and biked like the Iditarod Trail. A lot of cool history. I think this 88 was Susan Butcher won this in 88. I worked at the Riverboat for a while, and I forgot what it was. We were selling her book, or maybe it was like her family did something with dogs. I can't remember. But enjoy this clip and enjoy the piece of history. I'll be trying to get some more. I'm just going straight through history. Yeah? Go on VHS journeys throughout Alaskan history, throughout my native village history, and just a lot of historical things that I've been up to about this year now that I've been fooling around with tapes and pictures. And I've learned a lot of stuff, and hopefully you learn something too and enjoy this clip and enjoy future clips that I'm trying to put together, and have a great day.
It began with the gold, first in Cook Inlet country, then on the shores of the Bering Sea, and later gold is found near what would become the city of Iditarod. The year is 1908. That same year, a trail is blazed from Seward to Nome, the Iditarod Trail, a winter highway to the mining districts of the north. Nearly 80 years later, musher and dog still struggle on this trail. The quest for gold is still alive. The prize, $50,000 for the first to Nome. This is the story of the Iditarod. Today, the town of Iditarod is nothing more than a skeleton of what it was, the abandoned buildings, silent reminders of what used to be.
Oh, it was a flourishing town. It had clothing stores for men and for women, and it had flower shops, and it had drug stores. And
they had pool halls and card games, and then there were the lovely girls across there.
In its heyday, the Iditarod area was home to about 3,000 people. It was Alaska's last major gold rush. More than $14 million in gold was found from creeks with names like Otter, Flat, Happy, and Discovery.
We got $1 an hour, 10 hours, 12 hours a day on the dredge.
Iditarod itself was a social and trade center for the surrounding mining camps. What didn't come by riverboat in the summer made it by dog team in the winter over the Iditarod Trail. The trail passed through small cities like Knik and Flat, and villages like McGrath on the Kuskokwim, Ruby, Nulato, and Anvik on the Yukon, Solomon and Golovin on the Bering Sea. It was the winter highway for mail, freight, and gold.
If you got good teams, nothing to it. All you do is just ride in the back.
Pete Curran mushed the trail more than 60 years ago as a mail driver between Golovin and Nome. It took him 3 days each way, stopping in roadhouses by night.
$3 a day, $1 a meal. You eat supper, and it costs $1 to sleep, $1 for breakfast, $3. Cheap, huh?
At the end of the Iditarod Trail lies Nome, the most famous of Alaska's gold rush towns. In the summer of 1900, as many as 30,000 people arrived to find their fortune on the golden beaches of Nome. It was Alaska's biggest boomtown. Nome was home to the All-Alaska Sweepstakes, a 400-mile sled dog race, a forerunner of today's Iditarod. The winners are names in Alaska mushing history, names like Fox Ramsey, Scotty Allen, and Leonard Seppala, a man who would later become famous for another race, a race against time. January 1925, a telegram is dispatched from Nome to Alaska's governor in Juneau. There is an outbreak of diphtheria and a shortage of life-saving diphtheria serum. Frida Larson was 10 years old then and remembers.
We were scared, because they say no medicine for it until it got here, I always think that we were so lucky that we didn't get hit by it.
20 volunteer mushers carried the serum in a relay from the end of the Alaska Railroad line in Nenana to Nome. The medicine was carried 674 miles from village to village, mostly over the Iditarod Trail. Within 5.5 days, it was in Nome. 5 died from diphtheria, but the epidemic was stopped by the serum. It was Alaska's first great race.
I just thought to myself that the people were sick and all waiting on us drivers, and I had to do my best.
Billy McCarty lives in a Fairbanks nursing home now and needs a little help answering questions. He was 18 years old back in 1925 when he relayed the serum from Ruby to Whiskey Creek, 28 miles on the Yukon River.
I went up alongside of him and I stopped and I unlatched the serum package and I tied it in his sled and I said, "Okay, Edgar."
At 7 o'clock he got there. I hear him coming. He had big cowbells.
Edgar Nollner figures it was about 60 degrees below zero when he left Whiskey Creek that night. He couldn't see in the darkness, but his lead dog Dixie knew the way home to Galena. Edgar is still raising dogs, but he can't seem to find a leader like Dixie. Back in 1925, he had the fastest team in town. If you took your team from 1925, your team with Dixie, and you put them in a race today if they were alive, how would they do? Would they win?
They were pretty good, yeah.
They did pretty good that January night, more than 60 years ago, making 24 miles in about 3 hours. Then he hopped off his sled and his brother George hopped on and drove to Bishop Mountain. Charlie Evans relayed the serum 30 miles from Bishop Mountain to Nulato. Charlie died in the summer of 1987. The rest of the relay of mushers are also gone, including perhaps the most famous Leonard Seppala. Seppala drove well over 150 miles to meet the serum near Shaktoolik, and then turned around and relayed it to Golovin, another 91 miles. The history books say Henry Ivanov handed the serum off to Seppala near Shaktoolik, but more than 60 years later, one man says history forgot him.
Polish them up, fix the ends.
John Owley is an ivory carver in Unalakleet. He was living in Shaktoolik in 1925 and says Henry Ivanov asked him to take his place in the relay.
Later on, when they get a medal, I feel funny. I'm the dumb. I'm not the first time they get the best of me.
The recognized runners of the serum relay were each awarded a parchment citation for their heroism. The H.K. Mulford Company, makers of the diphtheria serum, sent medals to the drivers. Most of the men were also paid $30 to $40 for their part in that first great race, a life-saving race to Nome. Dorothy Page had a dream in 1964, a vision of a sled dog race over the old Iditarod Trail, a lasting project in honor of the 1967 centennial of Alaska's purchase from Russia.
I guess they all thought, well, the superintendent's wife is just really off her rocker. I was beginning to think I was crazy too.
Dorothy realized she needed a musher behind the idea, a promoter, a man like Joe Reddington Sr.
Well, she asked me if I thought we could run one on that Iditarod Trail, being that she knew we lived at Flathorn on that Iditarod Trail. And I said, sure.
Dog teams were disappearing from Alaska then. Joe thought a race, a really big race, might just bring them back.
I told him, well, I said, I want to see it be a $25,000 race and they like to all drop dead when I said that because nobody had heard of anything like that ever before, you know.
The 1967 Iditarod, that first Iditarod, eventually did pay $25,000 in prizes. It was a 54-mile race from Knik to Big Lake and back, the richest sled dog race in modern time. Isaac O'Klesick of Teller won it, winning $7,000. The race was canceled in '68 due to a lack of snow. George Atla won it in '69, but the purse that year was $1,000. Still, Joe Reddington was dreaming of a race to Nome. March 3, 1973. The impossible dream is about to come true. 34 mushers line up to race more than 1,000 miles to Nome. No one is more pleased than Joe Reddington, but the night before the race, the whole thing is almost called off.
So they checked our bank account and found we didn't have a dime in the bank the night before everybody was supposed to leave at the banquet. And I got up and talked to them, and I said, well, there was rumors that we wouldn't have the 25,000 when we had the '67 race. And there's rumors now that we won't have it, but I'll guarantee you.
Joe didn't race that first one. He was too busy raising money for the prize. Muktuk Marston donates the first $10,000 to the cause. The racers would go about 1,200 miles, beginning in Anchorage. Early on, the teams pass over the Alaska Range and drop into the interior. From there, they meet the Yukon River, travel down it, and then cross over onto the ice of Norton Sound. From the ocean, it's a sprint to Nome. In 1977, a southern route was added. On odd-numbered years, the trail bears south at Ophir, passing through the historic town of Iditarod. Mushers meet the Yukon River, but travel up it before making the passage to Norton Sound and to Nome. The route is now a National Historic Trail. Dick Wilmarth of Red Devil becomes the first to win the last great race, winning $12,000. He makes it to Nome in 20 days, 49 minutes, and 41 seconds. Bobby Vent of Huslia takes second. Dan Seavey of Seward is third. Mary Shields of Fairbanks was one of 2 women in the 1974 race, the first ladies of the Iditarod. Mary was the first woman to cross the finish line in Nome, 23rd overall.
No, I had no worries at all. I knew I wouldn't win the race, but I had confidence the dogs would get me there sooner or later, and just thought I'd enjoy it. And it's just what I did.
Since 1974, 2 women have won the Iditarod. Back in 1974, Mary wasn't thinking about winning. She knew she would make it, but others weren't so sure.
It seemed there was a lot of betting going on. The men were betting at which checkpoint the women would drop out of the race, and the women were, of course, betting we'd make it all the way to Nome. So the farther we got, the more money the women were making, so it was great.
They hated to get beat by a woman, and it seemed like every time we'd catch up with some guys, they'd, scratch behind us. So we were always the tail end of the pack because everybody kept dropping out as we passed them.
Lolly Medley of Wasilla was right behind Mary, finishing 24th. Only 2 men followed them in. Today, Lolly's training for another Iditarod, perhaps in 1990.
I think every musher that's ever run that race feels like no matter where they placed, first or last, that they won.
Joe Reddington Sr. came in 11th that year, happy to have run his first race to Nome. Carl Huntington of Galena took first, finishing in 20 days. His lead dog Nugget was borrowed from Emmett Peters of Ruby. In 1975, Emmett wins with Nugget. It is Emmett's first Iditarod. He knocks 6 days off the record with his time of 14 days, 14 hours, 43 minutes, and 45 seconds. First prize is now $15,000. Jerry Riley of Nenana wins in 1976 in 18 days, but there are fundraising problems and Riley's prize is only $7,200. Rick Swenson of Eureka is a rookie in '76, taking 10th. 1977 turns out to be the first of many Swenson years. Rick wins in 16 days. Jerry Riley is just 5 minutes behind that year, a hint of close races to come.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Ken Chase from Hendrick.
1978 brought a new name to the Iditarod, a name that would soon become well known in mushing circles. Rookie Susan Butcher is one of 3 women racers that year.
This is your first time on the trail?
Yeah.
You gonna make it?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Susan would eventually finish 19th, the first woman to make the top 20 and be in the money. The race for first would be between 2 men. On the Bering Sea ice outside of Nome, Dick Mackey of Wasilla chases 1977 champ Rick Swenson. Mackey had raced every Iditarod since '73, coming no closer to victory than 6th place. By the time they reach Front Street Nome, it is literally neck and neck. Tom Bush of radio station KNOM calls the action.
Both running only about maybe 4 feet behind Mackey. Here comes Dick Mackey, Rick Swenson. They're all running in. They look tired. The dogs look awfully good. They both have their hats off. Mackey is running. Oh, my God. We have Swenson. The team is pulling up almost neck and neck. And Mackey just stopped at the finish line. Neither of them has crossed the finish line at this point.
I was on my hands and knees looking between legs across the finish line to see who won.
Leo Rasmussen was the mayor of Nome then and was one man who could see the finish. The winning decision was based on old Nome Kennel Club rules.
First one. I said, well, the first lead dog nose across the line wins this race, and I said it was Dick Mackey.
It was a little disappointing to get beat, but like I've always felt from the moment the decision was made until today, I'm glad I was there to see it.
It was the closest finish in Iditarod history. Mackey, wearing bib number 13, is the lucky winner in 14 days.
Oh, that was great.
One year later, it is a jubilant Rick Swenson that crosses the finish in Nome. He becomes the first to win 2 Iditarod titles.
Official time, 15 days, 9 hours, 37 minutes, 47 seconds. Rick Swenson, the 1979 Iditarod champion.
Susan Butcher was 8 places behind, the first woman to finish in the top 10. By March of 1980, Rick Swenson is predicting that Emmett Peters' record of 1975 will be broken.
I think that I'll be able to do it. I'm not saying I'm going to win the race. I hope to, but I would be really disappointed if we can't break and set a new record this year.
But it is the Shishmaref Cannonball, Herbie Nyakpuk, who sets the pace that year, winning the halfway prize of $1,500 in silver at Cripple.
You race for the gold in Nome, you run for the silver halfway. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
The gold would go to yet another man. The record is broken that year by a man from Trapper Creek, Joe May. Joe finishes in 14 days, 7 hours, 11 minutes, and 51 seconds, 8 hours faster than the previous best. A record 25 mushers scratched that year. At the finish, Joe May says he's not a winner, just a survivor.
There was about every kind of trail condition you could imagine out there. We had bare ground and ice and deep snow.
Herbie Nyakpuk takes second that year, and Susan Butcher is fifth, the first woman to finish in the top 5. Rick Swenson would have the record back again in '81, winning in 12 days, 8 hours, 45 minutes, and 2 seconds, his third Iditarod win. Rick wins $24,000. The total purse is now $100,000. In 1982, racers found themselves competing against the wind. The wind was going 70 miles an hour at Chektuluk. The racers were going nowhere. It blew for 53 hours. Herbie Nyakpuk heads out in the wind but is pinned down for 24 hours in the storm. He's forced to return, and Herbie's race is over.
I got good team this year, but I make a lot of mistakes.
The master, Rick Swenson, is again able to take over. He finishes in 16 days, far from his record, but it is his 4th Iditarod win. Susan Butcher is only 3 minutes behind. Jerry Austin follows 9 minutes later. 1983 marks a new Iditarod tradition. Anchorage's 4th Avenue hosts the start.
Rick Mackey from Wasilla.
Rick Mackey wears the number 13 but considers it lucky. 5 years ago, his father won wearing the same number. On the Yukon River, Mackey has bad luck following a mismarked trail, but by the time he reaches White Mountain, less than 80 miles from Nome, he's only 10 minutes behind the leader, Eep Anderson.
Let's go catch Eep. Let's go catch Eep.
18 miles outside of Nome, he passes Anderson and becomes the second Mackey to win the last great race. He does it in 12 days. Dean Osmar of Clam Gulch turned an Iditarod legend into an Iditarod myth in '84. At the halfway point at Cripple, he collected the silver prize. As the legend goes, that means you can't win the gold in Nome. Dean Osmar did just that. He led the race over 700 miles, finishing in 12 days. Even Susan Butcher couldn't catch him, but her time would come.
Yeah, David, I got stomped by a moose, and Johnny's dead, and Hyde's borderline.
1985 would not be Susan Butcher's year. 2 of her dogs eventually die from the run-in with a moose. She would scratch from the race.
It's real bad.
How bad is that?
It's still snowing. It's still snowing, very heavy snow. They're forecasting up to 2 feet.
The race comes to a standstill for the rest of the mushers at Rainy Pass, where bad weather is keeping dog food from the checkpoints to come. The race is frozen here and again at McGrath. By the time the mushers meet the Bering Sea coast, there is more bad weather. A blessing in disguise for one bold driver. Libby Riddles of Teller decides to leave Shaktoolik and try her luck in the storm.
Are you worried at all about going into this wind into Koyak? Is that going to bother your team at all?
Yeah, I'd say it probably would bother them, but I might do it anyway.
After a night on the ice, she is first into Koyak. The gamble pays off. The prize is in Nome. After 18 days on the trail, she wins $50,000, the first woman to win the Iditarod.
Welcome to Nome, Libby. If I die now, it's okay.
Oh, it was just plain grand to win the Iditarod, period, and it just happened to be a historical quirk that I happened to be the first woman to win the Iditarod.
1 year later, Libby's championship team is out on the ice near Shaktoolik again, but this time there is no storm and the driver is Joe Garney. Not far behind is Susan Butcher. It will be a sprint for Nome.
And there you see her, the winner of the 1986 Iditarod, Susan Butcher, coming down the chute.
Shortly after midnight, Susan shatters the old Iditarod record by more than 17 hours. She wins in 11 days, 15 hours, and 6 minutes. Joe Garney would finish an hour behind.
But I can tell it was fast because it was, I'm tired than normal.
It was something that I was expecting, and it was something that I knew I would have to work hard for, and I had worked hard for it, and so it happened, and it was really neat.
At least 20 teams.
1987 was the year of the big gamble for 2 mushers. Jerry Austin and Dwayne Halverson pushed the pace early on, hoping they can get far enough ahead to beat the fast teams. But at the halfway point in Iditarod, the gamble begins to take its
It's
toll.
almost an impossible pace to hold. You know, we've just been going so fast. A little short on rest.
By the time the mushers reach the coast, there is a new race. 2 new leaders, Susan Butcher and Rick Swenson.
We've been dicing this out for 9.5 days. Now it's coming down to the wire. We're going to find out. Gentlemen, are you ready?
In the end, it is another victory for Susan, a second Iditarod championship and a new record.
It's 11 days, 2 hours, 5 minutes, and 13 seconds.
I adore racing, and I still get the same pleasure out of it that I got way back in the beginning. There is nothing that you have to think about except for the race and except for exactly what's happening. So it's a real special time of year.